Alright, so this is how to build a head the way pretty much I do it. I wanted to ask you guys if you guys like building up on heads or carving down. If anybody's built a head, you guys, how did you build your head? Did you build up? Okay. Okay, fantastic. So it's the same way I do it. I like building up. Way back in the day, I used to do to carve down. And the biggest issue with me on that one was the heads came out really big. So building up has been a little bit better for me. So it's just a method. Either way is fine. Just depends on how you like to do it. Did you have?
Oh, I started with the bucket head and then I glued 8 pieces of foam and carved the muzzle down and the details down.
Okay, fantastic. So you do the building up method as well. Because that way, for me at least, it's easier. It's almost like puzzle pieces for me to put together and then treat every piece separately and then start kind of carving from there and seeing the shape a little bit better. Plus, I can get away with having more perfect symmetry that way compared to carving down.
Sorry, what's the difference between building up and building down?
What did you say?
What's the difference between building up and building down?
It's pretty much more just like your own personal preference. I'm the type of person, like if I grabbed a ball of clay, I would like to put clay on top to get the shape instead of trying to put clay out to get the shape out of there. So it's just more of just how you like to work. And for me, keeping heads specific size, I like to build up. So the picture that I have up here, and it looks kind of weird because this is how I build the base for the heads when they start up. So I like to call them rockmen. That's like turned into this like cute little thing that we call it at the shop. So we build this type of rockman with 1/2-inch foam. So we build a balaclava first, and you can either buy a balaclava or you can, of course, sew your own. And creating a balaclava pattern is really, really simple. You can even use a balaclava that you have already, which is like the ski masks that you guys use underneath your suits. And you can add the foam on top of that. And for me, I think it's just a little bit cleaner. And that way you don't have raw foam exposed against your face, which can get scratchy over time. So this is pretty much how it looks in the expanded view. We used to create this pattern a little bit different a while back, but we ended up finding out that the way that it looks like on the bottom, and I can wrap it around the head, it looks better and it's a lot faster for us. No, go for it. Yeah. Take pictures. All this, I'll post all this up online too. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Yeah, pretty much. So the other thing to note on this is you guys will see strips of fleece or felt on them. I use them to reinforce the seams because I've hot glued it to the balaclava. The one thing to keep in mind when you're hot gluing it to the balaclava is to keep the glue pretty thin all around so you don't have like giant hot glue globs inside that are going to feel against your face because this is against your face. So I used to do Super 77 a while back, but I was having a lot of issues with humidity in Florida. So a lot of the foam was separating over time. So I went back to using hot glue when gluing this whole section. So I have the eyes where they're marked based on my pattern and where around the mouth area is marked. So when I start adding pieces, I know that that's where the eyes are. I should keep that eye area-ish in there and then the mouth. So I make sure that I can still breathe and see when I carve the head. So we go from looking like that to looking like this. So this is how I start dividing all the pieces out. So this is the way that I look at carving any head. I divide it into different sections. I always have the upper muzzle gets carved completely different, along with the cheek and the brow area. I keep it the same. And then I do the ears separately, and then the lower muzzle.
How would this change for a creature with a smaller snout? Would only the muzzle change, or would that change the shape?
It depends on what you want to do. So usually I start off with like a side profile when I'm drawing stuff on a piece of foam, and the muzzle will be the biggest change. Like if you're going to do a cat, you're not going to make it as long, and you might make it go up the eyes a little bit more. I still look at a lot of real creatures when you're making this, even though you're going to make a toony character, and just to try to get like the right proportions and stuff. So you don't get everything looks like a dog, but different colors and a smaller muzzle and different ears. So I do suggest that if you've never carved a head, do aim for a dog. It is kind of like the easiest shape to kind of acquire. And there's a lot of tutorials out there that I think cater more to dogs, so I'm sorry, other species people. It's just really easy to learn from there. So this is how I kind of view making a muzzle. So I will start off with a block of foam, and I will draw a side view, I will draw a front view, and I will draw a top view based on the way that that design looks like on the foam. And this is kind of the way I visualize it. So I'll draw a really simple side muzzle. It'll be like that, and I will include the nose and everything to have it in there. Even though a lot of the times I do end up removing the nose afterwards and replacing it with a resin cast nose, you can still, of course, carve it with the muzzle. So try to think of it in 3D format because you are carving an object in 3D. So that's why I try to draw the muzzle in as many different shapes as possible and start carving it out. The way I carve stuff out, it's with scissors and long blades, like the snap-off blades. Just be careful because they do get really sharp, but it's the easiest way for me. I don't use turkey cutters or any of that stuff like people used to use back in the day, but I do use a bandsaw for really large pieces because you can get really, really clean cuts. If you do use a bandsaw, make sure you talk to whoever you're buying the blades from, because I used to use the ones with really large teeth in them, and it would rip the foam up and then throw it everywhere. So get the ones with like the really, really fine teeth. So that's how it starts to look. I'll have the art drawn on the side, then I will draw the side view on it, and then I will take it through the bandsaw, and then you get a really clean cut. Most of my muzzles are done from 5-inch to 6-inch foam. 5-inch foam, which would be this green foam, is the stuff you can get at Joann's. And if you want something bigger, like 6-inch and up, I used to get foam from a company called Rockford Supply. And if you do that, just make sure you buy in bulk, because it gets very expensive.
What's your opinions on foam by mail? Because I've been using a lot of the charcoal foam from them.
I haven't used them, but I've used like Bob's Foam and Rockford and all them. The biggest thing that I see difference when you order online is you can get different densities. So if you like softer foam, you like harder foam, the harder foam works fantastic for noses if you want something a little bit more detailed. And I've seen a lot of people done the gray foam to get better shapes and cleaner shapes. And some people actually sand their foam. So if you have harder foam, you can get away with sanding it. I tend to stick to this density, which is like the one that you can find pretty local at Joann's. And it's worked out fine for the way that I carve. But I've seen all sorts of stuff. That's more of a preference thing. So they're all good.
What are your opinions on using self-skidding, expanding foams instead of, blocks of foam instead and carving it down?
I will show you that as well, because I do that too. But it's awesome, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, because I don't use the lights, so. So on this one, I had drawn the upper muzzle, and I had also drawn the lower muzzle because I was going to make a little bit of a thinner muzzle on this one. So I was able to fit it in this chunk of foam. This one was the yellow foam that I had, and it was a 6-inch block of foam. So you can just really crude, just draw what you think is going to be the shape that you want. I do this with Sharpies, and I draw over and over and over again. Make sure you get a lot of Sharpies. Sharpies like to die on your foam pretty much, so have lots of those. So when you start carving it, it starts to take shape. I mean, at first it looks a little weird because you're doing it in pieces. So what I'll usually do is the base like I showed you guys. Then I'll do the eyebrows and cheek combination area. And I've drawn that out on a piece of manila. I love using manila over anything else, and you can get tons of it. And once you have that glued and carved, then I start working on the muzzle, and then I start carving it down before I actually attach it to the head. So this is how I start doing the cheek and eyebrow area. So, like anything, of course, think in 3D, but you're going to be drawing this in 2D at first. So you think about, the thing that I think about the most is the eye shape. What type of eye shape do you want? So if you want like a happier look, maybe you want to raise the cheek a little bit more so the eye looks like it's like a little bit more squished on the bottom. I try to do bigger eye sockets, especially for really toony, happy characters, because it shows off really well. Remember that when you are carving something, when you end up adding fur to it, it's going to bulk up a lot more. So think about that as well. Those are things that you're going to have to do it a couple of times to see, because there's been times that I've made characters that look like they have chipmunk cheeks. more than anything because I didn't really take into account how much the fur was going to bulk it when I've used like really thick furs. So that's something that over time you'll start to visualize and eyeball, like, okay, I need to tone this down a little bit. So that's another one, how it looks with the other foam that I had used. I wanted a little bit of an angrier character, so I did squintier eyes on this one, and I had used that yellow foam. So I've had this yellow foam for forever. A lot of this stuff, foam will discolor over time. It's not bad, it's just one of those things that just happens. So you'll see some of my foam cards with different foam colors. The thing that I will say, sometimes it gets a little bit like visually jarring when you're working with this. If you're trying to get a lot of stuff with symmetry, avoid mixing so many foams. Sometimes it gets really hard to just visually look at it and see if one side of the cheek is a little bit larger than the other one. If this happens, what I try to do is I take a picture and I try to do it in black and white on my phone to try to make sure that I'm seeing all the right colors. So my eyes don't visually go to the green and the yellow and then I'm seeing stuff that isn't there. That's another one that I had carved a little bit smaller on this one. I left the mouth completely open. You can still see the balaclava sticking out from the bottom. And this one wanted like happier eyes when we did it, so I kept the eye sockets a little bit bigger. So this is talking about the bottom jaw. And this is something that I will say, be careful with the bottom jaw because a lot of times people make the bottom jaw the exact same length as the upper muzzle. And then when you fur it, you end up having like that larger chin, the underbite look. And it doesn't look as good, so be very careful with that. Always keep it a little bit shorter. So that's something that I try to like always remember. So that's something, this is, because we're going to go into expanding foam as well. So this is one of the expanded foam heads that I was pointing out that you see that the upper muzzle is still going to be longer than the lower muzzle. And then that way when I fur it, it's not going to look like it's going to jet too far forward. So ears. The way that I'm currently doing ears, or most of the time, I will be using anti-fatigue mat that you can buy at Lowe's, and that stuff is fantastic. It's really easy to glue, it's easy to add foam to it, and you can bend it into a bunch of shapes. And pretty much I think of the pattern, a really easy look for like the pattern will be something like that, and then I try to cup it and fold it, and then if I want to make the back of the ear thicker, I will add foam on the back to create more of like that chunky area. So it just depends if you like thinner ears or you like thicker ears.
How would you do like rabbit ears that stick up? Would that foam still work or would it like outweigh itself?
No, the nice thing about this foam is you can make really, really tall ears and they will not bend, like 1/2 inch foam or 1 inch foam that people will use, and eventually your ears will start to flop over. This one, you can still grab them, you can still bend them, but the ears will retain their shape. And this foam is really easy to find.
I'm assuming that you're using a heat gun to shape these pieces of foam, correct?
Actually, no. So I will grab this, you would say it's about 1/2 inch thickness of the anti-fatigue stuff. What I do is I will draw the pattern, and then I will cut a bunch of little slits on the back of the ear. So when I fold it, I hot glue it to the head, and then it kind of keeps its shape. You could heat gun it if you really wanted to, but that way it's just worked out fine, because when I hot glue it to the base, it stays put in its area.
I'm currently using camping mats. Would you say it's really similar? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
The camping mat has a little bit more bend.
Okay.
That's the other thing, and it's the blue ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just, sometimes glue doesn't adhere to them as well. That's
Yeah.
the only thing I've noticed.
Okay.
This one, this foam, when you have like the pattern on the other side that looks like a diamond plate pattern, if you end up shaving that stuff off, the foam, it's a closed cell foam, but it kind of opens it up. It actually, glue loves to adhere to that stuff.
Okay.
So it makes it easier. So that's the pattern that I was talking about, and then how you end up gluing them to the heads. Again, you'll end up seeing a lot of felt pieces all around. It's just to reinforce the area, because I like to grab my heads like through the ears, and you know, people are going to be rough on the heads, and I want them to be durable. So I like to add little fleece or felt pieces all over the place. So noses, so you can make noses in a bunch of ways, and the way that I usually like to make them is out of resin, which means that I've either made the design on the computer, 3D printed it, or I've actually done it out of clay. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. If you don't want to do any of that stuff, or you're not very technical about it, of course foam carving it is fantastic and it's very easy to do it that way. So we'll go over a couple of them. So 3D printed noses, if you guys love 3D or you want to get into 3D, I really suggest doing Sculptress. It's very easy to do organic shapes with it. And the nice thing is if you have symmetry problems, you can completely resolve them in something like this. So it's a program that is free. I do suggest playing with it. You can do a ton of stuff. And the nice thing is the furry community has a lot of 3D printers, so if you don't have one, just ask somebody. So that's a foam carved nose. This one I had done it attached to the head because I wanted a completely different look, and it was a very large nose, so I wanted the nose to be really light.
Good question.
Yep.
Do you like make a head in a 3D model program and then make it in slices?
100%.
Okay.
I know a ton of people do it that way.
Okay.
Because with 3D, if you are more of a technical person, and you can see a lot of my local places will print larger volume pieces, because I have a very small 3D printer, so I will only print like noses and claws and teeth and small things. But if I want a head, I just send it somewhere local in Orlando, and it's really cheap to do it that way. And then you have a piece that you're never going to technically get rid of. So, and then you can make a cast out of it. So I keep it and then make casts out of it.
I was thinking just make it in slices, print out on the paper, and then cut 1-inch foam, and then build up.
You could. I mean, there's a variety of ways of doing that. So yeah, that was just like a foam version of a nose, which I would say is the easiest way of doing it if you want light, inexpensive, and it's already attached to your head, so you don't have to worry about the nose falling off. That's another one of those types of noses. This is kind of like what I was talking about, the green and the yellow foam, which sometimes can be a little distracting. This one, of course, I was going for more of the grumpy look and everything, and I wanted a little bit of a smaller nose than the other one, even though it still looks really big. You will keep seeing me draw lines all over the place because I'm trying to make sure that the symmetry looks correct. And it's okay if you keep drawing over and over and over in it. Most of the time I end up shaving off all the markings because I'm just making sure that the symmetry is there. So you guys want to know about casting heads, since that's something that has become really common, especially nowadays with the community. And casting is very easy if you know what you're doing. So if you like working with clay, you can create a cast of a head, and then you can either cast it in expanding foam or resin. So this was a head that I had tested a while back. I actually never went and casted this one. But also make sure that you know the type of clay that you are working with. Do not use sulfur clays if you're going to be putting silicone on it to make a cast, because it will never cure. I learned this the hard way on one of the other heads that I will show on the next one. This one was a head that I was working on for a music festival, and it did not work out at all because I made a big mistake. I combined sulfur clay, which is gray, with the non-sulfur monster clay, which is the red one. I ended up adding silicone on top to create a shell over it so I could end up casting it at a later date. It never cured, so I had to throw it away.
If you fire the clay, does that still a problem?
This clay will never dry. This is just like in Spanish we call it plastilina, and it's a type of like oil-based clay, but it will never ever dry. But if you did it with one of the clays that does dry, I mean, you could totally cast with that. It wouldn't be an issue.
Place to get one of those heavy headbands?
I got this one years and years ago at a company called Monster Makers online, and you can find a bunch of these on the FX places or any of the places that do silicone masks, because they'll have mannequins like this for you to sculpt on or display your masks, and these work really well. This one in particular, these are the ones that were a harder material. They've actually changed it to foam now, which I'm not, like a hard foam, I'm not a huge fan of, because sometimes they will topple over because the clay is so heavy. So the way that this one, you can't see the bottom, you can maybe see a little bit over here. There's like a little piece of matting that I had done. These were hollow. I filled them with concrete inside, so when I was working on them, the clay wasn't heavy enough to topple it over. So just make sure you keep them kind of heavy, and then I keep them on Lazy Susans. And then that way I can like rotate it and stuff. And then that's a casted foam head. So the way I end up doing these, I end up doing the Rockman the same way. I start with the same base and all that stuff. And then I have a version of a casted, this is just a dog head that I have. I don't use this cast anymore. But I grab the Rockman and then I put it inside the mold of where I'm going to do the expanding foam. And when the expanding foam starts to expand, it actually binds 100% to the foam that's underneath, which has worked out much better than doing the expanded foam separately, carving it out, sticking it to a head, and then having to deal with adhering issues. Plus, I don't have to worry about carving it out. It's already bound to it. So this is kind of how the expanded foam heads come out for me. They're really soft, which is why I like this stuff. I buy all my stuff at Reynolds Advanced Goods, and they have one here in Chicago if you guys ever want to go to it. But they have one in Orlando, and I get to go to them, and they let me try out all these different foams. And I can give you guys links and stuff to these if you guys want to play with these foams. They will give you sample packs, and you should 100% play with it. It's a flex foam that I use. The one that I like to use is Flex Foam 3. Out of all the different ones that they have, I used Flex Foam 5 in the past, and it was so dense that the heads were super heavy. The way that number 3 acts is a lot like your typical foam from Joann's. Very easy to carve. The only thing that I will say as a warning is it can create a skin over top, making it a little bit hard to glue stuff to. So you want to kind of scrape the skin a bit before you're going to glue. So when I'm doing these and the casts, because I make all these out of clay and then I create a cast out of them, I end up raking. You can see right there. I rake all the foam. I don't do smooth things to the foam because it helps that when you end up casting it, it will adhere, like the glue will adhere to it correctly. So it's the same thing showing you guys how squishy this foam is. It's really comfortable, it's really light. This foam is not toxic after it's cured. It's the same thing like regular foam. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. When we are doing all this casting, we still do it somewhere where it's well ventilated. This stuff won't make a huge mess. So just be careful with it. Work with it like in the garage with the garage open. And wear junky clothes. Once this foam is on your stuff, it's ruined. It sticks to everything. And it also cures in about 20 minutes. So, biggest issue that people have had with casted heads, they've said the whole, it's going to look cookie cutter, it's going to look the same, it's just same dog face, same dog, same dog. And the thing is you don't have to make it look the same. You can use it as a base and kind of build up from there. This is if you are wanting to create more of like volume and a lot of them, but you still want it to have a unique look. So these are examples of 2 heads that were going to look completely different. And what I usually do is I like to add foam on the top. And the other stuff that I like to change on a lot of my heads, instead of keeping the casted foam nose that I already had on it, I like to put other resin noses, or I like to change the nose up, and then the head starts to completely change. Sometimes you'll see me cut the muzzle. This one actually had the muzzle cut because I had added all this stuff. And of course this one was a 3D-eyed head, which the 3D eyes I like to use a Vacuformer to do. So Vacuformers are great if you can make one, and you can make a really small one, and you can vacuform plastics, and you can make 3D eyes. So that's one of our Vacuform molds for our eyes. And the way that we do it is almost, we think of Lego pieces. We make it modular. So a lot of the heads I can interchange noses, teeth, eyes, everything, and then that way it makes it a lot easier for me to put things together, but still make them look really different. So it's almost like you went to a store and you went, I want that, create this, and it's going to look like the way that I want it. And that way it's helped me a lot to create things over and over again that are predictable and are good quality. You see, you had a question?
Oh yeah, what's a Vacuform?
A Vacuformer is a machine that will heat up plastic, and then it has a vacuum inside, and it will suck the plastic down over a mold that you have you made of. I can show you a little bit more if you want.
Yes, please.
And oh, sorry.
Did you make your own mold for the eyes, or
I
did
did.
you
No, I made one out of wood, and I used to work with a lot of stuff with wood, and then also my ex-husband did too, so we did a lot of shapes with wood, and then that way we can keep them over time. You could also 3D print it, and you could do that because it doesn't get as hot for you to worry about that you're going to go cold. So, and most of the time I do it just myself.
Could you smoke with cabinet impressions?
You could, 100%, if you wanted to. I used to do a lot of stuff. I do, like, all my hooks, I vacuform them now because the plastic comes out lighter, but I used to resin cast them in the past, and I also used to do fiberglass in the past. So it's just kind of gone down to what is the most predictable. It's easier for me, and I know I can replicate it over and over again and not take days and days to do. So this is that head again, and you can see I've added foam in different areas. He wanted a cropped ear, so I ended up cutting the ear down. I left the other ear alone. And even the nose is something you guys might recognize. I get a lot of stuff from DVC. She does really, really good work, and I work with her on a lot of projects. So this stuff has been fantastic. I totally recommend her. And it works really well with my heads. Her shapes are great. For some reason, it just works great. So this is something that you will see. My heads will look like this before I fur them. And being a 3D-eyed head, I put the eyes in first. I do the eyelids around the eyes, and then I kind of build up the foam so the head has a more integrated look. For the plastic-eyed heads, I usually wait to add the eyes until the end. So it's a little bit different, depends on the head that you're going to do. So now we're going to have some questions. I want to see what you guys want to ask.
So I just wanted to know, because I have one of your bases,
Okay.
actually. So what kind of adhesive do you use for the expanding foam bases? Because I wasn't able to get like a nose to stick to it very well.
Did you end up scraping the
Yeah, I
foam
scraped
quite a
it
bit?
like you told me on Twitter and everything.
Yeah, and if not, I usually just grab a blade and I literally cut off all the excess and just, I mean, I cut off the skin completely and then leave the stuff underneath. I use hot
So
glue.
using a Dremel would be okay for getting the skin off?
The Dremel might actually like bend the foam out. I usually just use a long blade and I just shear just the outer layer off. Some of the older heads that we used had some issues with the release that we were using. It was too strong and it was coating it all over, making it almost impossible for stuff to stick to. But if you're still having issues, I can show you where to cut it in certain areas to make sure it really, really sticks.
You said with the expanded foam, it bonds as a cast.
Yeah.
Could you like do a vintage foam in certain areas and then cast over and soften foam?
Totally good. Yeah, it'll stick to everything because once it starts expanding, you'll see it bubble out and start to stick to everything. And once it's done, you can't rip it off until you start like really clawing at it.
Would it be viable or just not really worth it to try and do some sort of like 3D printed resin cast like skull base and build foam on top of that for a soft goods?
You totally could. Yeah, it wouldn't be an issue at all. A lot of people will do that when they're doing moving jaws because they'll want a harder base so they know that it's going to work, but they don't want that hard feel on the outside. And they will build up the cheeks and everything. If you do that, try to think of almost like your understructure. Keep it pretty thin and pretty small because then you're going to be building like the cheeks and the eyebrows and the muzzle. But if you do that, you can make a really good moving jaw that way.
What thickness of foam do you use for around the eyes and the...
3-inch foam, usually for around the eyebrows and the cheek area. And then 5-inch to 6-inch for the muzzle. I use 3-inch for the bottom jaw. And then once I've carved it down, I will add another 2-inch on the sides of the cheeks so I can create kind of like the rounder area.
How do you, like, so mine so far looks kind of good from the front, but once you turn it to the back, it's just flat.
Okay.
How do you avoid a kind of flat looking image from the corner?
So when I look at heads, I look at them, for some reason I think about them always like a profile view. And then when I start carving them, I do end up rotating them and carving them down in different areas. I'll take a lot of pictures actually from like a 3/4 from the back to make sure that the cheeks are following the right way. Because I know exactly what you're talking about, that flat face look, that the suit looks good from one angle, but it doesn't look good from all the other angles. That's one of those things that you would have to practice a lot, draw a lot, and I'll try to draw the character in multiple angles. And if you can't draw, get an artist friend to really help you draw that stuff, and that way you can start seeing the shape in just different views.
For you use your own eyes designs, do you work from a similar Rockman base as well, or do you use a different base?
I don't because it ends up being too thick around your eyes. So I use this material, I create almost like a front skull area out of this material called Warbler. Have you ever used that?
I haven't used it, but I've seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I ended up finding that material with the help of cosplayers. And Warbler has been fantastic if you guys want to make really rigid ears or really tall ears, or you actually want to make armor, or you want to do something with a user on eye head. I love to make it so it kind of follows my face a little bit closer, because if you do too much foam around your eye, especially for the use your own eyes, your eyes will hide and they'll look really small. The one thing to keep in mind that I've noticed with the use your own eyes, make the eye hole a lot bigger than you think you're supposed to have it, because once you fur it, it becomes a lot smaller. And I learned this the hard way with some cheetahs that I did a while back, and they just looked like they didn't have eyes, just like little black dots. And I built up too much foam around here, so that eye looked a lot smaller. But I actually have one that I'm working on at home, and if you want, just send me a telegram and I can shoot you some pictures of how I'm working on that one to help you out.
Is there a good idea of, when looking out of a fursuit head, sometimes visibility is the hardest part. Is there a good rule or something for making sure that there is good visibility, like positioning the eyes?
It's something really easy, and I used to do this a lot before, and it looks really silly. Put on the balaclava, grab a silver marker, and kind of draw dots where your eyes are and your pupils would be. I mean, don't poke your eye, but like kind of like touch it, and then start drawing little dots. Then you put the balaclava over a mannequin, and you will see where both of those eye dots. I mean, one might be a little bit lower than the other because you're just kind of eyeballing them, literally, when you're putting them there. But that way you can see, okay, I will see around this area, so that way you don't have like that giant blind spot that you can't see.
Okay, thank you.
So it's easy.
Is the Warbler kind of like epoxy sort of thing?
No, Warbler, it's really interesting. If you look it up as Warbler or Wonderflex is the other stuff that I've used. It comes in a plastic, it looks like a plastic sheet, and it's usually rolled up, and Warbler comes in like a brownish color, and you just heat gun it, and you can shape it to anything. You can sand it, you can paint it, it's literally magic. This stuff's amazing. I like it more than I like the Wonderflex. The Wonderflex has fibers in it, so when you sand it down, you can still see like the fibers. Warbler comes in a ton of different shapes, and you can also get it transparent. So if you wanted to build like an eyelid, like a whole eye, it would be a transparent look. It depends on where you shape it over, like a spoon or something that would be smooth. And it also comes in a bunch of other colors, like black. And it's awesome to work with noses or horns or anything like that. And that stuff, if you have a cosplay supply place near you, most major cities will have something you can buy. It's amazing. I say try it.
What's the temperature for it to start to be malleable? I'm just concerned about if you produce something in a hot car, it might fall.
See, that's a big problem that people will talk about. Unless you're dealing with really, really crazy heat, and I live in Florida, and we like literally live in the sun. So stuff will melt in the car. I mean, hot glue will melt. I mean, it will damage. Unless you have it like in the car for days on end and the heat hitting it, it won't really change.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to like really blast it with hot air, like with the heat gun to destroy it. And the good thing is if you messed up a piece and you want to redo it, you can just reheat it and then reshape it. I have, but I didn't think they moved as well, in my opinion. I thought, we used to call them wiggle jaws instead of moving jaws, because they would move, but they wouldn't fully snap close. So you would still see that kind of like that gap. And the best way that I thought moving jaws worked would be on a hard base, so a resin base, a 3D printed base, or something that you could cup your chin that was hard, and you could still have the rest out of foam, but having that hard area really, really helped, because if you create the hinge, it has something to just spring up and down. So try to do something hard to get that snap. If you don't mind that, then you can get away with the foam. The foam, the thing is it will deform sometimes, so it doesn't have that snap like a resin head would.
So I've made foam swords before with the camping mats and contacts in it.
Okay.
really durable.
I use contact cement to glue the bottoms of the feet. It's no problem.
Is there a reason that you wouldn't use it in because it off gas a lot, or is it?
If you're working with, the only thing is contact cement takes forever to like stick to something, in my opinion. That I just use it on the bottoms of feet, put weights on them, walk away. Leave it alone because it smells like death. So I just don't like working with it. That's the only thing. It like makes me really sick, and I try to work with it in a ventilated area. So that's the only reason I would say just be careful with that stuff, because it's more toxic, especially if you're gonna work on a head. But after it's cured, it's fine. Because my feet won't have like that crazy glue smell or anything like that, especially if you let it just air out for a couple of days.
Okay.
So, if you're cutting like with scissors,
Mhm.
how smooth does it have to be? Like, how much will the fur cover up?
I try to keep it as smooth as possible, just because if you use really short fur, it will show through, and it depends on the type of quality fur that you use. So if you use something that is a little bit thinner fur, it will show through, and that's the other thing too. Be careful with the green foam. There's certain white furs that will show that green tint through it. I've seen that with seal a lot, and I've seen it with like shorter piles. So it's one of those things to just kind of keep in mind.
You had mentioned about the vacuum former.
Yeah. You can. Yeah, you can make your own. Look up how to make a vacuformer at home, and you can do it with a ton of stuff that you have at home. You might have to build a couple more things. If you can also use your oven to heat up the plastic. I used to do it that way. I had made my own, and I had like a vacuum attached to it, and it was a tiny one to do just little noses, little things, and it worked out fine. If you're doing small pieces, it's great. It's actually a really fun tool to use. The one that I currently have is like the size of this table. To do really, really huge. My friend kind of went overboard with building it. So, yeah, so it's gigantic, but you can do a lot of this stuff with an oven. So if you wanted to do a vacuformer, just look up how to do it at home on the cheap. And it's actually really inexpensive to do, and it completely opens up your world to do new things. It's fun.
Thank you. Okay, now mine's more of like a further question, really.
Okay.
But, like, how would you like reinforce the jaw and the muzzle if it's falling apart?
Is it furred?
Yeah, it's furred.
You'd have to work on it from the inside to try to see if you can glue it. If it has a balaclava, you'd probably have to rip at the balaclava and get in there if it's falling apart, because
It's not quite there yet, but it's got some tears.
Yeah.
I've wore it to a Mardi Gras parade,
Yeah.
and I've had some kids slap the crap out of the muzzle.
yeah.
And it's
Is there no way that you could sew the fur like in the areas that it's failing together so you could reinforce it?
You got it in front of me, but well, right now I've been trying to use a wire to like chop it open.
Okay.
Because the only thing that's keeping my mouth open right now is the thing I have.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'd have to work on it from the inside, especially if it's furred. That would be one of those things that I'd have to look at it and maybe give you better suggestions.
So if I could see it again, I'd look.
Yeah, I'd say totally if you have it.
Do you have to do anything to prep the foam to be furred?
Yeah, I like to scrape it a little bit. I'll go with a blade and I kind of scrape it, and sometimes I grab a slicker brush and brush the foam like violently. And then that way it starts to kind of just rip it in areas, but enough areas that you could just add glue and it would just adhere to it. The one thing that I keep saying, the expanding foam 3, the flex foam 3 that I use, it sticks, like stuff sticks to it a lot better. Flex foam 5, nothing stuck to it. I did a ton of glue tests and everything, and it would just right off. So just be careful with some of those foams. And the newer stuff that they're making, it seems like stuff is adhering to it a lot better.
Also living in Orlando, one of my main concerns building heads is overheating issues. Are there any tips or tricks to be able to make it easier to breathe on a hot, humid summer Florida day, or basically, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know I get to deal with this too, because it's like, oh, am I going to go suiting today, or do I want to die? Which is why I'm enjoying suiting in this weather, which is nice. The thing that I try to do is, I don't really work with fans a whole lot anymore, because I like to be able to, for the heads to be thrown in the washing machine to be able to wash them, because I like to throw everything in the washing machine to keep it clean. I try to make the muzzle and the nose area one whole, so this whole area is out. So my nose, even though my nose doesn't work for anything, I can still breathe out of my mouth, and the hot air wants to shoot out. Because the thing is if you start covering your nose and covering part of your mouth, that hot air is going to start building up and going into your eyes, and you're pretty much creating like a hot box effect in your head. So if you can get it pretty tightly against your face, and this is out, it helps keep that air just flowing. And of course, like having eye mesh in your eyes and all that stuff. I tried to do sunglass lenses forever ago on my heads because I thought it was really pretty, and I liked the way like Disney heads looked. And I also realized that they're blind when they're walking around, but they have handlers. We don't all the time. And it fogs up like crazy, and especially with places like Florida. Unless you have fans or something going on in there, it's going to go fog crazy. You can also add like extra ventilation. Some people will do like around the ears. In my opinion, I haven't seen a giant difference with it. So I just mostly focus on areas where I'm breathing out of. So it would be out of my mouth and keeping my eye sockets, like that area, pretty big, so more air comes through or gets out. But it's Florida, so it's like a... Well, you want all the hot air like out, because you'll see it here, especially because we were walking around yesterday in a suit, and our eyes, like you'd see the heat like coming out of our eyes and just like making shakes. So it's cool. That one, it depends on the type of foam that you have, because there's some of that gray foam that's a lot harder to carve. You can use, I wouldn't go anything, like, you don't have to go really crazy fine. I'd still have something that you can like pass your finger and it's like, okay, I can feel this, would scrape my hands, and just kind of like go sand crazy on it. I've only done like 1 or 2 noses like that a while back. It's just that I have to order it online, I couldn't find it local. So that's one of those things that it was a to-do, so I didn't think about it, but it works really well. I think, if you know who Midori is, the maker, I think she can help you with that one because she uses a lot of that harder foam.
So for your eyes, would you recommend printing or painting? Because I've seen a lot of makers like More for Less prints their eyes, like the actual irises and everything. So do you print ever, or is it just paint?
I used to print forever ago. I used to do where I would put the buckram through the printer, and I would print the eye, and it would come out, and it looked beautiful. And then I would seal it. But the issue was that no matter how many times I sealed that buckram, eventually they would fade, and I would have a lot of issues with the eye, like just fading. I mean, they looked dead on, like something that came out of Photoshop, because that's what happened. We made them in Photoshop and he printed them out. But, and if you're going to print eyes, make sure that if you do it on buckram, which is the really easy material to use for eyes, and it's like I think it's like a cottony base because the material will still absorb ink. Try to stick it onto white paper, and if you're going to jam it through your machine, that way when it prints on the eye, it doesn't just shoot and make a mess inside your printer, it makes the mess on the white paper if you do that. The only thing is you can seal them, but eventually you will have like a fading issue. I know I did forever ago.
What do you use to seal them?
Just clear acrylic, just over and over, clear. And that way you can still, make sure that you kind of blow on it, or use a pressurized can, because sometimes it'll clog up all the little holes. But nowadays I like to just paint them with, I use these pens called Deco paint pens, and I also use acrylics and airbrush. And then I seal it.
Like a close for that?
What did you say?
Copic markers?
You can do that too, but you have to really seal them to make sure that you don't have any bleeding. That's all.
Are there any particular brands of hot glue that you recommend, or are they kind of all the same that gets the industrial grade quality?
I haven't had too many issues. I use all the same for high temp, not the dual temp or any of that stuff for low temp. High temp has worked out perfect for me. And you can get that one at Walmart, Amazon, anything, or bluesticks.com.
For 2D eyes, we've just kind of been sticking them on as kind of the last thing, but then you have to worry about the fur being shaved down enough and worrying about the glue potentially sticking out a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you recommend any better methods, or do you just kind of have to stick and pray?
Well, you can do it. You can do them before you fur them if you wanted to, and you can. I've done it both ways. Where you can have the head, has the eyes and everything, and you do the pattern around the eyes, so you get it really clean. But it's one of those things that around eyes, I I still will have sometimes a little bit of glue my seat bound. I have to go in and like cut it and clean it. So that's one of those like patience is key. And sometimes it is that, let's hope it looks good. It's like I had to hope this one isn't twisted. The one thing that I like to add after the fact is the sun dot. Because sometimes if I draw them on, and if I paint them on, and I stick the eyes on the head, sometimes one dot's here, and the other eye is over here, and then all of a sudden your head looks like it's wrong. But it's not, it's because your eyes are visually focusing on those two dots. So I like to stick them without the dots, then do one, and then kind of eyeball the other one, and then do the other one. And then that way it doesn't look like one eye's higher than the other, because that's kind of like one of those things that it messes with your eyes.
Okay.
And I don't know, for me it bothers me when people do sun dots in the wrong places. So they'll do them in like the same spots.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's two sunlight spots that are coming in. It's like, I mean, it's fine if you live in the world with two suns. But, but I try to think about it like our way. So if you have one spot here, then you have it over there. So it's those little things that sometimes it's like, oh, your head looks cross-eyed. It's like, no, it's just because of the way the sunspots are done.
Yeah.
So those are little things.
Yep.
I had a question. If you have multiple fur on the head and you're sewing the seams to stick down, how do you make sure that the seams aren't sort of bulking out and lay flat against the head?
So when I sew heads, the seams will always be there, and they'll still be like that big. Then I go in with scissors and I cut as tight as possible to the seam. But before I do that, I brush the head out as much as I can to get all the fibers out. Then I go in and it's just the tightest I can get to it before I get to the actual seam.
Would you recommend putting some glue on or something just to hold the stitches in place, or
no?
Just,
if you do it with, I do all my heads with a machine. So I just do single stitch all around it and just make sure you lock your stitches at the end. You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh.
I had two questions.
Okay.
One, when you were printing, were you trying archival or pigment inks?
What did it say?
Were you trying archival or pigment inks?
Oh,
okay.
You know, I was just using just a regular Canon ink that I got at Walmart.
Second one was what kind of release do you use?
For
the flex foam.
I am using, I'm trying to think, because I was using this spray stuff that was like the mold release that was like the generic one. I can take a picture that I have it at home, but right now we're also using this waxy stuff that you rub all around it. If you do have a Reynolds, ask them about it because they'll suggest both. The waxy stuff works out fine. Sometimes it likes to stick to the foam a lot, so just test both of them and see which one works best for you. But one of them is like a multi-purpose release that they give you, and it just comes in a can, and then there's one that you spray, there's one that you paint on, and then the wax stuff you like rub in there to get it out.
You mentioned that one was causing problems with the heat.
Yeah, it's like the multi-purpose release. It depends on how heavy you cake it on, and if it's just too much, it sticks to the foam a lot, and it creates almost like a shell to it that sometimes can make it really hard to glue things to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You said you actually wash the whole heads in the washing machine.
Yep.
Do you have it so you can disassemble the eyes, or?
Ever since I changed to the new mesh that I'm painting with the acrylics, and then you seal them, there's not that much of an issue of the eyes fading or the eyes buckling. Because the old buckram, when you would throw them in the wash, the eyes would have like that kind of wavy look, and I wasn't able to really wash them. I had to pull the eyes out, then pull the mesh out. With this new mesh, just throw the whole thing in there and just walk away, pretty much. The only thing that it fades a little bit is your airbrushing over time. But then I just go in and then I'll re-airbrush a little bit around the nose and the mouth. But it's like minor things, and it's good when you wear your head a lot. That way you can keep it clean. But I recommend people sending them to me to do it, just because I don't know people's machines, and I don't want to tell them like, oh, go ahead and do that, and then the machine like ate the head pretty much. Because I had one customer from Europe put his feet in the washing machine, and he put it in agitation was just too high, and it burned the fur all off the sides of the feet. And I was like, you should have done it in delicate. He's like, yeah, but we can control the agitation amount. And I was like, oh, yeah, mine's delicate and it's fine. So that's why I tell people, send it to me. So if anything were to happen, I can fix it because I told him to send it to me. But you can wash my hands no problem.
What's the name of the new material?
Downstairs. Well, the new it is buckram. You can get it, but it's a different type of buckram. I think Fursuit Supplies has it. But I can also suggest you can message me. There's a plastic one that I'm using as well, and it's 100% waterproof. You don't have to worry about it.
So you are using a new type of interfacing?
Yeah.
Alongside with the style heads?
There's two. There's one that's like a type of canvas mesh that is plastic, and if you're going to paint that one, make sure you really, really seal it so you don't get a lot of cracking, but make sure that you sand it a little bit over top so it wants to adhere a little bit better. And some of the Createx inks will stick to it really well. You stick to the auto paints if you're going to do that.
That's what I've done with
Okay.
stuff, but I wasn't sure, I didn't know you could still use some interfacing.
It's like a combination of everything that I use. It depends on what the person's going to do. And when we've gotten stuff from like sports mascots, they'll tell me this person's going to be a hockey mascot. He's going to be around ice and water and things. So I give them the plastic mesh right away. So it's kind of based on how rough you're going to be with the mascot. If you want the eye detail to be more pronounced or you want more durability, so I give them options. I'll do, I guess your quick question before we leave.
You said you were going to post your slides. Where are you going to do that?
I'll post them on my Twitter, and my Twitter's under Latin Vixen, and I will do video stuff and everything, because these are all kind of like quick things, so you guys, if you have any more questions and stuff, I'm going to do like video tutorials about this stuff to show you guys some more in-depth look. As well. I'm going to do like a voiceover on it and then post it up, and everything will be either, they'll be both on the Latin Vixen Twitter or the Mixed Candy. Okay. And I'll do one last question.
How do you generally like to attach your head fur? A specific example would be sweet passage. Okay, you have that really nice, really long, nice blue fur that's stuck up.
Okay. Well, most of the head I will glue it with super glue. I mean, that's hot glue. And if it has hair or anything like that, I actually sew all those pieces on by hand, and I kind of layer them. So if I have mohawks and stuff, they'll be stuffed with polyfill, and it'll be like almost like little pillowcases in there. And then I sculpt the fur how I want it to look by sewing it in different areas. So it's kind of like you get to be hairstylist and you move stuff around and then you pull here and there. So a lot of the suits that you'll see have like a lot of crazy hair that I've done. If you really start touching them, you can really see where I've kind of put thread in it to make it look that shape. So I add fur on top of fur to give it that extra like crazy look. So it's a lot of sewing and a lot of hot glue that's like mixed in there. I just try to avoid the hot glue from making the thing like one giant hard ball. So when you touch the fursuit head, you don't want it like, it's all hard everywhere. You still want a little bit of softness, a little bit of bounce. So I try to kind of keep the glue really thin all over it. Thank you guys for coming.